because they have us by the financial gunnies. They've been unloading. They've been unloading their dollar-denominated assets, and yet they have sufficient that they can still command things like missile technology from us, almost like tribute. And then when they're ready to turn around and come buy something that they want, like they'll probably be in late November to December buying wheat, for example. So when they get ready to buy large quantities of wheat or other American assets, then I'd expect them to really get serious about beating the dollar down so that their dollars they hold will buy them more. In other words, they've got the dollars now. They've transitioned that into like gold or euros or whatever. As when they turn around and start buying our products, it'll be at not pennies on the dollar, but maybe half price.
Wow. So well, that's going to crush our farmers, and the ripple effect's going to be felt next year.
Well, we're already seeing problems here, too, with the farming situation, though, bear in mind, and that is that we don't have much in the way of surpluses. This has been just an abysmal year for farmers. No matter where you were, there was some kind of natural problem that crippled your production. If you were in the great river valleys in the breadbasket of the country, you had the terrible 2 months of cold weather, continuous rain, seed rotting, all of this kind of thing. If you were along any of the mountain ranges in the east, it was the cold weather and the humidity, and it just goes on and on. Even in California, they had the fire situation. So we're not in a situation where there's so much of a surplus in wheat, for instance, that any level of purchasing won't have a magnified effect. So we're going to see the hyperinflation in food and starvation globally simply because of the very bad harvest, and this is, I think, the 8th year or 9th year, I'll have to redo those calcs, that we've had a net drop or a net inability to grow enough grains to support the planet. So, and we're also seeing strange, or rather other ripples of it. For instance, if you follow certain things, then you get to see all of these trends maturing and popping up. Recently it was announced, for instance, that McDonald's isn't in Iceland anymore. Why? Well, because of hyperinflation. Every day they'd have to adjust food prices so much that pretty soon you'd be paying, $20 for an order of fries, and it just doesn't work out that way. It's just not economic for anyone. So that's the first crack in the whole corporate wedge. Or wall, but it's emerging out everywhere. And this November, when we get our emotional break here on the 5th, very likely around the 5th, we will see I suspect, a very negative reaction, even though it's crocodile teeth in the, down for a while with release language and then pop back up the next day, so maybe 12 hours in one state, 15 hours in another 18 hours, and so on, flopping back and forth in our graphs. I suspect that the overall trend will be very negative indeed for the dollar in a relatively short period of time. It might be that we lose another third or greater of the dollar's purchasing power before January of next year. Now, that should be quite noticeable.
And the kind of thing, for example, that I worry about is that sawtooth effect starting after November 3rd. That might be an on-again, off-again, Israel's really going to go against Iran, or just like, preliminary report says X happened in the Middle East, and then Y happens, and so forth. It'll be that kind of sawtooth action. From a Dow Jones, from a paper asset standpoint, wouldn't surprise me if we don't hit a market low till as late as January. We might even see some rallying in the market during the first quarter of next year. The real problem further out in the data, once we go down and test those lows down around 66.27, would be the recovery of the Dow and the other nominal U.S. paper into perhaps the end of July next year, because there's this period in the July-August time frame next year when a lot of people who study astrology and do so very successfully in the financial markets have a period. I think Arch Crawford, who publishes Crawford Perspectives and several others say they haven't seen a period this ugly for the economy in the country in 200 years, and that's basically middle to late July through end of August. And that wouldn't be so worrisome, except that that's also when we have the real showdown going on between the U.S. population rising up in a rebellious throw the son of a guns out of Washington who got us into this mess, going into elections and so forth.
And bear in mind that we believe that a big part of the motivation of the American populace in terms of let's get rid of the bums and the revolutionary fervor stems directly from how terrible the impact is of the dollar degradation and the hyperinflation. And there's another issue here, and that is that you have to be careful relative to paper assets, because it wouldn't surprise me, for instance, to see the Dow reach all-time highs next year sometime simply because of hyperinflation of the dollar itself. So it'd be relatively meaningless if we hit 20,000 in the Dow. We're at what? If we hit 10,000 now, just adjusted by inflation, we need to be significantly over that just to have broken even since the last time it was at a peak. So a lot of the paper asset numbers, everybody's saying, well, it's I've gotten a few emails that said, well, nothing happened, and it's like, I seriously beg to differ. It's just a question of your perspective and how soon that's going to have a direct impact on your ability to buy something or the price you'll have to pay for it. And within just the last 3 or 4 days, we've had significant changes in the food pricing in Southeast Asia, directly as a result, I believe, of the underlying dollar pressures that caused the Saudis to dump the WTI today or this week.
The other thing, by the way, which is implied in all this, is if we see a Dow of 25,000, there's no reason why my little your rule on gold wouldn't also be true. You take 25,000 divide by 10, and you're going to have $2,500 gold. Now, or much more. I mean, at some point it'll totally decouple, and it could go to 5, 6, 10,000. Who knows? But there's every reason right now, in my opinion, and I'm not an investment advisor. I just play with my own money. But I believe that there is a decent case to be made not to be in the paper assets and be investing in things that you would not otherwise have access to when the economy starts to really get shaky.
That's a very good observation. We had friends of ours that went through, I used to work for an outfit, or let me put it this way, I used to work as a subcontractor for a very large computing company that everybody loves to hate out here in the Northwest. And as a subcontractor, I had contact with other subcontractors, including people in Argentina that went through all of this. And so I watched from afar through emails and ultimately through paper mail as individuals that used to make $250,000 U.S. a year went to abject poverty as the Argentinian economy collapsed and ended up having to go through horrific times just to get back to somewhere where they had a sustainable lifestyle. And so the impacts as we go through this kind of thing will be quite severe. For instance, importing oil will become a very serious issue. George may not notice it down where he's at, but we will certainly feel it up here in the Northwest, because while we have a refinery, we don't produce any of it here. We have to haul it down from Alaska. The cost of moving anything for any purpose will seriously escalate. So we'll see, in spite of any of the threats of the cap and trade and any of the other political moves, we'll see huge costs of energy no matter what, simply because just to get the electricity to your house, if you're in an area where the grid is fed by coal, you have to understand that coal is dependent upon the price of diesel, both for diesel electric trains and for diesel equipment to dig the coal. And that's its key component in terms of its pricing structure. So every increase in the price of oil that we see on the market that isn't as the dollar is altered, which we'll see for a while. In other words, we'll see the dollar, as George was saying, have these violent rallies, which will be the underpinning for all of the paper assets and the commodity price rallies as well. And some of these violent rallies will be shed in a short period of time. But it'll probably end up being, and I'm sure George has a name for this type of a graph, this kind of stair step up, 2 steps up, 1 step back. and that gains you some considerable hype relatively rapidly. And it wouldn't surprise me if we have a net effect of reaching the time of hyperinflation next year, say, have the price of oil relative to what we're paying now up in the 200s or $300 a barrel, spread over that period of time. The first impact of all of this is, like I say, it's probably going to be food this year. As George notes, pretty soon the Chinese will be into a different buying phase, and then we'll see things turn around. And it's going to be curious, too, to see whether or not they accept missile technology in order to come back to the table, because I differ from George in feeling that the offer now is perhaps trying to get them to come and continue to buy debt, because they haven't since last July. And it's caused basically the Fed to be eating its own dog food, in the sense that we have this circuitous little thing here where the Fed tells the Treasury, yeah, we'll buy your Treasury notes,